The CBS Evening News with Harry Reisner substituting for Walter Cronkite. And Eric Severide in Washington, Morton Dean in Newcastle, Delaware, John Hart in New Orleans, Martin Negronsky in Washington, Terry Drinkwater in Prescott, Arizona, John Lawrence in New York, and Josh Darsa in Cleveland.
Good evening. Hubert Humphrey today acknowledged that he is leading a divided party in this presidential campaign and appealed to Democrats not to sit out the election. At Seagirt, New Jersey, Humphrey said the party is being tested as never before. And in his words, we shall either be one party together in victory, or we shall be many parties separated in defeat. Earlier, at the dedication of the new Delaware Bridge span near Wilmington, he spoke of divisions and building bridges over them. Morton Dean reports.
The symbolism would be too great for any politician to let pass by. The building of bridges particularly significant to Hubert Humphrey, who must overcome division within his own party if he is to win in November. And from a man who has heard much chatter and noise recently, this call for reason.
Passion, militancy, chanting, clatter, and noise seems to preoccupy much of our attention and time. May I respectfully suggest that reason and restraint are called for.
Last night in Flint, Michigan, Humphrey was met by the most boisterous group of antagonists yet to confront him during this campaign.
I surely have a high regard for your expression and your idealism and what you say, but I want to tell you, you don't have to go to the university to learn how to chant, "We want peace." You can save the money. And may I say that if it is my privilege to serve as the president of this nation, I will make it my first duty and my first commitment to seek every known honorable way to bring peace to that troubled part of the world known as Southeast Asia and Vietnam. And I'll do it. But it will not be done. But it will not be done by slogans. It will not be done by demonstrations. It will not be done by placards.
Mr. Humphrey has rarely invoked the name of President Johnson during this campaign. However, a strategy decision has apparently been made that will disappoint those Democrats and independents who have been anxiously awaiting some sign from Mr. Humphrey that he intends to disassociate himself from some of the Johnson administration's policies. A high campaign source reveals that such a tact has been ruled out, saying that to take on Mr. Johnson now would only be self-defeating, inviting new divisions in the party, which the source concluded is just what we do not need. Morton Dean, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign in Newcastle, Delaware.
The White House today denied that President Johnson's statements on troop withdrawals from Vietnam were meant to rebut Humphrey's campaign remarks on the subject. But at the same time, Press Secretary George Christian made clear that Mr. Johnson means to speak out on administration policy during the election campaign, especially on Vietnam, even if it creates problems for Humphrey. In Christian's words, the president is going to be president until January.
Do you know how to charge a battery? A set of spark plugs? With the Supercharger, a Phillips 66 credit card. Good at every Phillips 66 station in all 50 states. Every Best Western and Quality Quartz motel. And every Hertz rent-a-car office. The Supercharger. Ask any Phillips 66 dealer for an application. And charge something.
Phillips 66 Trop Arctic motor oil is for the birds, and the trees, and the flowers, because it helps prevent air pollution. Trop Arctic keeps your engine clean, so the anti-smog device on your car will keep working. Trop Arctic holds engine blow-by gases and fumes in suspension. When you change oil, dirt just drains away, so your engine stays cleaner, and so does the air. Trop Arctic, the anti-pollution motor oil only from Phillips 66.
Richard Nixon today declared opposition to any East-West trade that might build up the military capacity of communist countries. and he said the nation has been naive in its trade policies in this area. The Republican presidential candidate made the remarks in a foreign policy speech in New Orleans. John Hart reports.
Richard Nixon came to the Deep South not for a contest over George Wallace's strength here, but for a contrast with his style. As frontrunner, Nixon seeks the role of statesman above the clash of code words and slogans. He was introduced to the American Legion Convention as a member and a delegate.
I don't think that in my whole career I've ever had so many Legionnaires behind me. I guess they have the better view from what I hear. But nevertheless, you know my television up there.
A Nixon NATO policy is emerging, nothing less than the rebuilding of the North Atlantic Alliance.
All of us in this room, I know, share the heartbreak that came from the invasion of Czechoslovakia and snuffing out that little bit of freedom that was beginning to show itself among those proud people in the heart of Eastern Europe. But I can say to you today that it has been my conclusion that while it seemed to be an unqualified reversal for us, there could be a dividend from what happened in Czechoslovakia. Let me tell you what it is. Those same Soviet tanks that rumbled over the frontier less than a month ago woke up. It woke up the slumbering Western Alliance out of its complacency. And the repression of the expanding freedoms in Czechoslovakia, while it was a genuinely tragic blow to that unfortunate people, but perhaps the witnesses to the tragedy in Western Europe will draw lessons that will enable them to preserve their own freedoms in future years.
A foreign affairs address deep in the heart of Wallace country is not the obvious way for Nixon to fight the Wallace threat here in the South. It is Nixon's way, says one of his aides, to show by comparison that this is more than the election of a national police chief, that Richard Nixon will not try to out-Wallace Wallace, and that as a front-runner, one way he can try to become president is by trying to act like one. John Hart, CBS News, New Orleans.
Under criticism from Republican congressional leaders, the party's vice presidential nominee, Spiro Agnew, today backed away from his charge that Hubert Humphrey had been soft on communism. Senator Dirksen and Representative Ford said they knew of no evidence to support the charge. And Governor Agnew, claiming to be unaware of the political history of that phrase, said he regretted applying it to Humphrey. Agnew's campaign tactics also came in for criticism today by Lawrence O'Brien, Humphrey's campaign manager, in an interview with Martin Agronsky.
Agnew certainly does follow instructions. I must say that he has been sufficiently heavy-handed in presenting his views on behalf of Mr. Nixon himself, so no one can wonder about what those particular views are and what the intent is on the part of Governor Agnew in carrying on this demagoguery on a day-to-day basis. All of this brings me back in my thoughts to the 50s, to Mr. Nixon in the 50s, Mr. Nixon in 1960. And I can understand Mr. Nixon saying to Governor Agnew, now, Spiro, this is the way you do it. But Spiro so far hasn't been quite as adroit in bringing about this byplay into this campaign to arouse certain basic emotions as Mr. Nixon has been over the years.
When you refer to the 50s, you're talking about the period of Joe McCarthy, McCarthyism.
Yes, what we have at this point, and I honestly feel that perhaps we will not have this ongoing, because I note that there's been public attention directed to this, but what we have is a revival of McCarthyism at this moment on the part of the Nixon-Agnew ticket. And let me emphasize, Joe McCarthy, not Gene.
Yeah.
Well, I feel that at the moment, Mr. Nixon is a shadow candidate, if you will. He, up to this point at least, has failed to enunciate a view on any significant issue of the day. He seems to be willing to confine himself to public appearances before mass audiences with no specific comment on the issues of the day. I can assure you that we intend to do everything humanly possible to resolve that matter and to bring Mr. Nixon from the shadows clearly into the sunlight for a confrontation.
Are you asking then for national TV debates?
Yes, debates nationally.
A series of debates?
Yes, we'd like to see that.
Mr. Humphrey wants to debate Nixon face-to-face alone or with Wallace involved, too?
We would be prepared, certainly, to engage in these debates with national candidates, and I think clearly Mr. Wallace is a national candidate. His name is going to be on the ballot in most states.
Spiro Agnew said today he had not discussed his remark about Humphrey being soft on communism with Richard Nixon before making it. Third-party candidate George Wallace told policemen in Springfield, Missouri today, "I'd like for you fellows to run the country for the next couple of years." Upon questioning by CBS News reporter David Dick, Wallace explained that he did not mean letting the police take over the government, but he did mean freeing them to enforce the law and straighten out the country. Later, in Springfield, Illinois, Wallace laid a wreath at the tomb of Abraham Lincoln and asked for the support of all colors and races. The House Committee on Un-American Activities today decided to investigate the Chicago disorders accompanying the Democratic Convention. The investigation will concentrate on what part subversive elements may have had in the trouble.
This is living. Some people think there's a better way. If you're independent, you set your own style. You don't follow the crowd. You find a better something, including a better tasting cigarette, perhaps. Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. Old Gold Filters. A delicious mixture of rich tobacco flavors. Flavors that never came through a filter before. Something extra, too. Gift Star coupons.
The gift coupons? She saves them. It's the flavor I'm after. Why smoke them if you can't taste them?
Old Gold Filters. The cigarette for independent people. With flavors that never came through a filter before. And with Gift Star coupons. Same coupon that comes on fresh-tasting menthol Spring 100s.
In Prescott, Arizona today, at a familiar place and sounding a familiar theme, a familiar politician began a comeback. Terry Drinkwater has the story.
Barry Goldwater has started all of his political campaigns here on the courthouse steps of Prescott, Arizona. He's a much more relaxed man now than when he began campaigning for the presidency here in 1964. But he's stronger than ever on the issue which he thinks will win for him and for Richard Nixon, the issue of law and order.
4 years ago, on these same steps, I started a quest for the highest office in this land. And as you all know, it wasn't quite successful. I spoke here, though, 4 years ago about the dangerous fact of crime in our streets and cities, but I wasn't heard. And today this problem threatens the very existence of our free society. You don't need today a review of the nauseating statistics to realize the enormity of this danger. Even as crime increases, those who break the law are frequently accorded more consideration than those who try to enforce it. There's only one end of the road that we're now on, and that end is anarchy. And to avoid this, all of us have to reconsider our own responsibilities as fathers and mothers and citizens of this country. We must get rid of poor judges and not elect any more.
On that same issue of law and order, Barry Goldwater's grandfather was elected mayor of this town when it was part of the pretty Wild West. The polls indicate that the younger Goldwater, Barry, will be elected to the United States Senate. And if he is, the man who was defeated for the presidency 4 years ago will once again become an important conservative factor in national politics. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Prescott, Arizona.
Goldwater's opponent for the seat of the retiring Democratic Senator Carl Hayden is Roy Elson, Hayden's former administrative assistant. Allied units in Vietnam claimed today to have killed hundreds of communist troops in turning back an enemy attack on the provincial capital of Tay Ninh, northwest of Saigon. There was no accurate account of enemy dead, but Allied officers said they assumed that the retreating Viet Cong carried a large number of their casualties with them. The same officers also said the Viet Cong remained strong enough to strike again at Tay Ninh. The Saigon Command in its latest weekly casualty report lists 195 Americans killed in action. That's about half the U.S. combat dead reported in the previous week. South Vietnam reported 375 combat fatalities, and the communist death toll was put at 1,664. A court order issued today by Supreme Court Justice William Douglas blocked temporarily the transfer of 113 Army reservists to Vietnam. The men, all from the Cleveland area, were scheduled to leave for Vietnam tomorrow. Now they will have time to appeal a ruling against them by the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. They are challenging a 1966 law which allows the president to mobilize reserve units without a declaration of war or national emergency.
Famous trick shot golfer Paul Hahn couldn't meet his busy exhibition schedule without the speed and convenience of his own Piper twin Comanche. And he'll tell you flying's a sport that's hard to match and easier to master than breaking 100. How about you? Wouldn't you like to fly? It's really very easy. Just visit your nearby Piper dealer and take the special introductory flight lesson he's offering for just $5. You'll fly in a sleek, good-looking Piper Cherokee with modern low wing. You'll handle the controls yourself with the guidance of an expert government-rated flight instructor. You'll find it a fascinating experience, a most rewarding sport. Why not visit your nearby Piper dealer and try this exciting special $5 introductory flight lesson? And for full information on flying, write for your Learn to Fly kit to Piper, Box 311, Lock Haven, Pennsylvania.
Captain Lloyd Bucher, commander of the captured U.S. intelligence ship Pueblo, was quoted by North Korea today as telling a news conference his ship was deep inside North Korean waters when it was seized last January. He also was supposed to have said that the United States should apologize to North Korea for the Pueblo's alleged spying activities. In a later comment, the State Department said once again it has no reason to believe that the Pueblo violated North Korean waters. Tonight's report in our series on growing police militancy takes up the controversy over methods and weapons police are adopting to deal with violent confrontations. The seriousness of the situation, as CBS News correspondent John Lawrence points out, is seen in two calculated attacks on policemen early today in New York and Illinois. We start with the one in New York.
It happened early this morning on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, a section that is racially mixed. A hidden sniper on a rooftop fired rifle shots into this police car. The first bullet shattered the windshield. Another ripped into the rear door of the cruiser. The rear window was also broken. Fragments of glass littered the roadway. The two officers suffered multiple cuts, but were otherwise not injured. They were lucky. Sergeant Peter Kunick may have saved his life by ducking immediately after the first shot. Patrolman James Rigney told reporters, "I'll say a few extra prayers today." If this were an isolated incident, it might be worthy of only passing mention. But this shooting happened only 60 feet from a point where two other patrolmen were shotgunned from ambush last month. Both were seriously wounded but recovered. The fact is that some militants have declared war on police. Their numbers may be small, but it appears their threat is real. There was another example today in a Chicago suburb. Police in Summit, Illinois were patrolling early this morning. Two shotgun blasts peppered the side of their squad car and blew out the windows. Again, the police were lucky, suffering only cuts from flying glass. Summit has been the scene of racial troubles in the past week. Authorities had hoped things were quieting down. Gun battles between police and Negroes are common in riots, such as last month's outbreak in the Los Angeles ghetto of Watts. A committee of the Los Angeles City Council met to explore the reasons for the riot. 3 Negroes were killed, 5 policemen wounded, and 42 citizens injured in the 3 hours of heavy gunfire. Exactly what happened and how it started is still being bitterly disputed. But what happened later illustrates a serious social phenomenon. Some people hate the police. Their numbers and intensity may be multiplying with their willingness to talk about it. Witnesses at this hearing testified to abuses and savagery by the police. One young man said he and his sister were beaten while trying to take an injured man to the hospital. The incident had this effect on his attitude toward police.
If this is the way this world is going to come to, where when we walk down the street, we got to be beaten, our women's got to be beaten, our kids got to be shot at, and everything else, well, for every cop I see riding down the street, I am going to shoot. and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Because I am mad, I'm sick, and I'm fed up. You know, and I am definitely, whether he's black, white, yellow, green, I don't care what color he is. As long as he's a cop, I'm going to shoot. And I mean it.
The vengeful hate in the voice of that man from Watts does not represent a majority of Negro opinion, but it is being echoed by black militants across the country, and people are taking the talk of an armed revolution seriously, especially the police. These are policemen from Cleveland, where 3 officers were shot and killed in July during a gun battle with Negroes. Normally, Cleveland police are issued only pistols and shotguns. But Josh Darsa came across a stakeout for a gang of armed robbers recently, and this is what he found.
Are you fellows issued new equipment periodically like this?
This is our own equipment, Daniel.
That's your own equipment?
That's our own equipment, yes, sir.
You had to go out and buy it?
That's what we did.
How come?
How come? Well, we got the regular standard pistols issued to us, and then this is what we got. In fact, this one isn't even mine. Somebody handed this one to me.
A friend of yours?
No, I don't even know who it was. Another policeman here, because he had a gas gun with him.
Why do you have to buy your own?
Well, we want something a little heavier to help us. I think it's a smart idea. You're going to fight these guys here with sawed-off shotguns and rifles with pistols?
The police in this car had been chasing the bandits when a bullet shattered the windshield. The car went out of control and crashed. One policeman tried to fire at the getaway car, but held off because of the danger to passers-by.
Is this the gun that you were almost going to shoot them with?
Yes.
What is that called? What is that called?
This, I declined to relay any information on that if you don't mind.
Why? Why?
I'd rather not say.
Is it yours?
Yes, it's my own personal weapon.
Have you purchased that recently?
Yes, I have.
For what specific purpose? Could you tell us?
My own personal protection. I feel that I can't fight a high-powered rifle with a 6-shooter.
And the department only issues you a 6-shooter?
I decline to make any statement.
But do you feel safer now that you've purchased that on your own?
I do, yes. It gives me, as an individual, the firepower of 3 policemen.
What can it do specifically? Is it a rapid-fire weapon?
It is that. It's a rapid-fire weapon, and I can put out a lot of firepower with it. I won't say how many rounds are held in the clip or anything like that, or what type of action it is, but it's my own personal weapon that I purchased for my own personal protection, and that's all.
For the record, the gun being carried by several Cleveland policemen is the universal .30 caliber M1 pistol. The action is semi-automatic, like the standard M1 infantry rifle. It costs $120. Cleveland police began buying heavier weapons after 3 of their colleagues were cut down in an ambush by armed Negroes this summer. Police department regulations forbid them from carrying such weapons, and officials do not condone it. But a study is underway, and plans are being made to establish a specialized squad of Cleveland police trained in high-powered weaponry to fight back in attacks by well-armed snipers. Police do not trust people in the ghettos. People in the ghettos do not trust police. It reflects the widening gulf in the concept of the police officer's role in a volatile and often violent big city society. The argument continued in our final report. John Lawrence, CBS News, New York.
Prices generally closed lower on the New York Stock Exchange today. Volume was 14,600,000 shares. The exchange index lost 11 cents.
Thinking? Or do you have a headache?
I'm thinking about my headache.
There's aspirin upstairs.
Nothing stronger.
There is nothing stronger. 9 out of 10 doctors recommend aspirin. And it's the strongest pain-relieving ingredient you can buy.
What are you, some kind of doctor?
I read.
She's right, you know. Aspirin is the strongest pain-relieving ingredient you can buy. That means nothing is stronger than Bayer aspirin, because Bayer is 100% aspirin, and aspirin is the strongest pain-relieving ingredient you can buy.
Told you that Bayer works wonders?
Mm-hmm.
just isn't anything stronger. Tell you another thing?
What?
You're a lousy chess player.
Bayer works wonders.
With the presidential race now well underway, Eric Severide in Washington takes a look tonight at the campaign and the candidates. Eric?
Presidential election campaigns rarely start off with a sure, smooth touch. Sometime after Mr. Eisenhower opened his in '52, a newspaper chain favorable to him published an editorial saying he was running like a dry creek. This came as a shock to the general and his staff, and things changed. He began to hit out. It's a bit hard to define the Nixon and Humphrey campaigns up to now. Mr. Humphrey, an impulsive, outgoing man, is contradicting himself on specific issues. Mr. Nixon, a calculating man, is passionate on the generalities, silent or equivocating on the specifics. To employ a couple of aging metaphors, Humphrey seems to have both feet planted firmly in midair. Nixon seems to have both ears to the ground so closely that he risks burying his head in the sand. George Wallace's campaign remains essentially negative in nature. He is strong on what government ought not to do, weak on what it ought to do to solve our problems. Nixon enjoys the attacking position, a reversal of his role in 1960, when he had to defend and had to be careful not to reveal governmental secrets, like the plans for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Humphrey now defends the full record of a not very popular president who said he would stay out of politics, but charges in when he thinks his basic war policy is endangered by anything said on the stump. Mr. Humphrey is now the party leader. Its future rests on him, not on President Johnson. And if it's fair for Johnson to correct Humphrey in public, it is hard to see what Humphrey has to lose by correcting Mr. Johnson. The late Robert Kennedy won support, he didn't lose it, by frankly admitting the mistakes of his brother's administration. The vice president, a candid man in private, might discover that public candor still appeals to the American electorate. It is, of course, more natural to Humphrey to accentuate the positive things in life and government. He's an optimist by nature, and the record is by no means all bad. Mass violence, for example, has been at its lowest level this summer in the last 5 years. Unemployment has now dropped to its lowest level in 15 years. The difficulty is that this seems to be a year when most people have the bad things uppermost in their minds, a general mood in which people are more easily moved to count their troubles than their blessings. It's a desolate thought, but perhaps the people are determined to elect the man who makes them feel the worst. Harry?
That's the news. This is Harry Reisner. Good night.